everybody, welcome back to the distance learning program. At the end of the last video, I accidentally pressed the wrong button on my computer screen here, and it terminated the video a little too early. And during the break, I just noticed that I misspelled the word graphic. So if you look back at the last video, I spelled it G-R-A-F-I-C. It should be G-R-A-P-H-I-C. Graphic is spelled P-H, but P-H is pronounced like an F in English, like in the word phone, P-H-O-N-E. So it's pronounced like an F. And you may have wondered, well, what is a graphic organizer? And if you look in the book on page 66, you can see an example of a graphic organizer on page 66. Here's one in the book, and it's just a diagram that helps you to organize your thoughts before you write a paper like an essay or a paragraph. So it's just a diagram that people use to organize their thoughts. But remember that these are all examples of diagrams: the bar graph, the graphic organizer, the pie chart, and they're just helpful to organize information. Now, the next part of the lesson will be on page 81. So if you can turn to Unit 6 on page 81, it's 6F, and it begins grammar connections. And the words that we're going to talk about are when, before, and after. When, before, and after. And if you look in the orange box, it says use when, before, and after to order activities in a sequence. A sequence means that the activities are in order. They follow one another, okay? So it says use when to talk about two activities that happened at the same time. Two activities that happened at the same time. So that's when you use the word when the activities are at the same time. Then it says use after to introduce the first activity in a sequence. So when one activity follows another, you use after to introduce the first activity. And it says use before to introduce the second activity in a sequence. So using before means that you're going to talk about the second activity that happens in a sequence. Now, if you look down here in the blue paragraph, it says Part A. This asks, what do you do when people interrupt you? So they're using the word when, which means at the same time. When people interrupt me, I usually stop talking and listen, but sometimes I ask them to let me finish. So that means at the time when someone interrupts me, I ask them to let me finish or I continue talking. So at the same time. Then B says, Mina asks, what do you do to reward yourself after you finish a difficult task? And after means during the time that follows the difficult task. What do you do then? And it says, after I finish a difficult task, I often eat ice cream and cake to reward myself. So the two activities that happen in order or in sequence are finishing the difficult task. That's the first activity. The second one is eating the ice cream or the cake. So if you say after I finish a difficult task, after means that you're introducing the first task. After I do the first thing, then I do something else. Okay, so after introduces the first task. Now, if you look down here at the diagram at the bottom of the page, let's look at the different activities. And it says, what do you do when people interrupt you? When people interrupt you. So when means at the same time. And according to the blue paragraph up here, a person could either continue talking or they might say, please let me finish. Next, it says, what do you do when you need to concentrate? So at the time you need to concentrate, what are you going to do? So that happens at the same time. What will you do before our next test? So before introduces what happens second. So before means during the time that leads up to the next test. What do you do during that time? Then it says, what do you do after you meet a deadline? And remember, in this example, it says the person eats ice cream or cake after they meet a deadline. So after introduces the first activity. So it says, after you meet the deadline. So you meet the deadline first, and then what happens after that? And that's eating the cake or the ice cream. Now, it says, what do you do before you start a difficult task? So before you start a difficult task, that means in the time leading up to that, what do you do? When do you procrastinate? That means at the same time you're procrastinating. And then it says, what do you do when you can't meet a deadline? What will you do after you leave our class today? What did you do before you left your country? What will you do after you finish studying at this school? Where did you study before you came to this school? What will you do before we have our next class? What do you do when you are late for an appointment or a meeting? What was the first thing you did after you got up this morning? And finally, the last question is, what was the last thing you did before you went to bed last night? So you can think about all of these different questions and how you would answer them individually. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to email me or you can text me, okay? But thanks again for being with me today, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Have a great day.